Greetings, everybody, and welcome here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So today we're doing the episode of What's New. I've moved What's New from the Tuesday night to the Thursday night, specifically to break up the album kind of review shows. So you got Ben's Album Challenge, which comes out every second Sunday night. A look back at a classic rock album, which comes out every Monday night, and I didn't want to have three of those type of reviews in a row, even though one of them's more or less me reviewing it for a personal reason. The other one is about classic, and this is about new. They're all different, but I didn't want to have them all bunched together, so I'm moving What's New to the Thursday night slot. Gives me a couple of extra days to think about this album, because the new albums are always more complex because you don't have as much familiarity with them. So the album we're doing today for What's New, in its new slot on the Thursday night, is Peter Gabriel's I.O. or In and Out album from this year, 2023. Released December the 1st, 2023. This album has only been out a few days. I've had my chance to listen to both mixes. We'll get into that when we get into the review part of it. It's a very complex album, and probably the most complex review I've ever done. Usually I have either my whiteboard full or one page of information full, depending on the album and what I feel is best for the situation. In this case, I have a full whiteboard and 3 full pages of notes. So it's going to be a fairly lengthy video, I think, and as complex as anything I've done at this point. So I'll give you the basic information on the album first, which is what I normally do. So we have released December 1st, 2023. There's 7 different studios in which he recorded at. Real World in Wiltshire, England. And then you have British Grove, the Beehive, and Copperhouse, all in London, England. High Seas in Johannesburg, South Africa. This one might be a little different. Elvensalen in Uppsala. I'm not quite sure where that is. I was going to look this up, but there's too much information and I completely forgot about it. And then Phonoprint in Bologna, which is Bologna in Spain? I believe it is. So the album lengths, this is a little bit more complex. So we have 68 minutes and 8 seconds basically for the bright side mix, and then 68 and 8 minutes and 34 seconds for the dark side mix, or the inside mix if you prefer. And there's also the binomial mix as well, which I'll talk a little bit about these as we go along. It was on Real World, EMI, and Republic labels, various places. Produced by Peter Gabriel, Brian Eno, and Richard Russell. These are the 3 producers of the album. And then now we're going to get into the personnel that were on this album. There's quite a lengthy list of personnel. I removed, because on his personnel list on his album, he lists all of the mixers and computer programmers and everybody in with that. And to me, I just want to talk about the musicians. So the programmers and those, if you want to, you can find them on the album if you decide that it's worth purchasing. So there are about 25 musicians on this album in total. So I'm going to just go over what they play and who they are. Okay, so you have the opening of one, of course, is Peter Gabriel. He plays he's lead and backing vocals, of course, that's to be expected. Keyboards, piano, some synthesizers, percussion, the charango, which is a type of Spanish guitar, I believe, or a type of string instrument. I think it's considered a string instrument, not necessarily a guitar of that note. So I'm not as familiar with this instrument, but that's my understanding. The charango is a string instrument. And he plays the glass harp. And for those of you who are pitching that great big harp it's not like that. The glass harp is another reference that they use towards musical glasses. So they have a set of musical glasses on the table. I assume they're either of different sizes or of different volumes of liquid in them. I think water is generally used to make different sounds as they're used. That's my understanding of what a glass harp is. So if I'm wrong, I'm sure the musicians out there will tell me. And that's fine, because this is an educational thing for me as much as it is for people watching. Okay, so the next musician, David Rhodes, playing 6 and 12 string acoustic guitars and other guitars, but mainly those are the ones he's playing here. And he also does backing vocals. Tony Levin, of course, on bass. Manu Katché on drums. You got Ged Lynch on percussion. Tom Cowley, or Cawley, I think it's Cawley, on piano. Evan Smith on saxophone. Josh Spank on trumpet. You got Melanie Griffin, Roynak Connolly, and Jenny Abrahamson on backing vocals. You have Leanna Olson on cello and backing vocals. You have Angie Pollack on synthesizers. You have Brian Eno on some synthesizers, manipulative guitar. I'm not quite sure what he's referring to there. So anybody has any experience with that, that would be nice to get an explanation as to what that is. And then, of course, on the ukulele. You got Ollie Jacobs on synthesizer, piano, and tambourine. Don E. doesn't give a last name, just a Don E. on bass and synthesizers, or bass synthesizers. That's what it is. Katie May on acoustic electric guitars, percussion, guitar effects. So I assume that's fed through the synthesizer, but I guess I'm not 100% sure about that either. Richard Evans on a dog whistle, I believe that's what it is, and mandolin. But I thought dog whistle was silent, so I'm not really sure how that fits in. Richard Chappell, I put him on here because he's a computer programmer, but I don't think he belongs in this section. That's not really a musical instrument, so we will delete him from this particular conversation. Richard Russell on filtered percussion. And to me, that just means that he's played the percussion and then filtered it through different sound-making machines. Hans Martin Buff on percussion and synthesizer. Ron Aslaw on synthesizers. Ollie Middleton on percussion. Paulo Fresco on trumpet, and Steve Cad, I think it's Cad or Gad, I'm not sure, on brush loop. And I'm not even sure what a brush loop is. I guess I could look it up, but I didn't. Okay, so now, having given you all the background information on this album, the album was released in two forms, I believe. The bright side mix and the dark side mix. There's also a binary mix, but I don't know if that's been released as part of the album. I think these two versions are released with the album, so you get both mixes. But so what I did is I listened to both mixes. Now, I'll just tell you, they're very different. There's a lot of differences between the bright side and the dark side mixes. I think I'm of the same mind of some of the other guys who have reviewed the album, is that there are some songs I prefer the bright mix to, and then other songs I prefer the dark mix to. But I'll get into that as we go along. I'm going to try and do each song and then tell you what I like and don't like, and then whether I like the bright mix or the dark mix a little bit better. Okay, so the first song on this album is called Panopticum. Or Panopticum, I think is how you say it, but I'm not 100% sure. So it has a strong Gabriel vocal sound to it on both mixes. A little bit fuller, I think, on the dark mix. It's a bit of a subdued track that builds up and gets heavier as you go along, much heavier in the dark side mix, as I find the drums and the guitars in the dark side mix are much more frontal than they are in the backside. In the bright side mix, they tend to be a little further back, and the keyboard and synthesizer parts tend to be a little bit more forward here. And then you'll get odd instruments on the bright side mix like horn or saxophone or violin that are a little bit more notable. So you don't hear them as much on the dark side mix, which I think kind of makes a little bit of sense because the guitar and the drums are more forward, so they're going to drown out some of that mix. Or maybe just that mix itself, they have kind of edit them down or edit them almost out in some cases. So that's all technical stuff that I'm not an expert at. I'm just telling you what I hear. That's it. It's got a catchy beat and it's vocally driven. This is a song pretty dominantly vocally driven. As most of the stuff here you're going to find very, very dominant vocal performance here by Peter Gabriel on this track and most of the other tracks as well. And I like this track. I gave it a 7. The Court, which is the second track, is probably my favorite track on this album. I found the vocals very intricate and the synthesizer additions really reminiscent of some of his later period stuff prior to this, I found. Okay, so you have some nice percussion fills here, especially notable in the bright side mix. The piano and the synthesizers give that kind of forlorn sound to them, and they're more forward, of course, in the bright mix, I find as well. The beat and the rhythm is really catchy, and I noticed this more in the dark side mix because it's more guitar and more drum oriented, I think. But not always, but for the most part it is. The next track up is probably my second favorite track on this album. I gave it an 8. Playing for Time. This is a vocal song, I believe. A piano opening with some nice violin parts to it. Vocally and harmony vocals. It's got this kind of harmony vocal style, I guess maybe you might want to call it. I don't know if there's actually harmony, but it feels like he's harmonizing his vocals. It's more of an emotionally charged song than the predecessors. I think this is one of his best vocal performances on the album as well. And I quite like this song, even though it kind of is not really heavy, not really a heavy rock song. A little bit heavier on the dark side mix, but I prefer this mix over that one. And it builds this kind of orchestral music to it as well. The next track up is the I.O., which is the 4th track on the album. I like this one quite a bit too. Nice piano opening, very clean and clear vocals here. Melodic beat, I like that. Another vocally dominated track. The dark side mix is a little bit heavier, I think. Now, don't get the impression that the dark side is a heavier mix than the bright side. I don't think it's necessarily heavier. It just has more guitar, and the guitar and drums are a little more predominant, so it tends to give that impression of being heavier, but I don't actually think it is totally that way. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. 4 Kinds of Horses, which is the next one. This is a very subdued opening. Some nice keyboards and synthesizers on this track as well. And I find that it builds vocally, especially when the backing vocals come in to play in the song at a point. I think it's a dark and challenging song, a little bit too dark for my liking, but I find the whole album has a lot of that kind of melancholy, dark feel to it in a lot of the tracks. So at this point, the songs have been going down a half notch at a time to this point, and then they go up a little bit here with Road to Joy, which I really like. There's a mellotron sound at the opening of with some voices in the background. At least I believe it's a mellotron. That's what it sounds like. The percussion sounds almost, well, not so much the percussion, but the guitar part that accompanies the percussion has this almost Bowie quality to it. On some of Bowie's albums, I would have said this is a kind of a Bowie quality. You know, it has that sound to it. I think it's got a catchy beat, lots of keyboards here as well. Vocals very Gabriel-like or Bowie-like. There's that line that where Gabriel gets to this point where he's almost treading on Bowie's vocal sound a little bit, and that's what I'm trying to get at here. I don't think he sounds like David Bowie, but he does have, his vocals tend to be a little higher in this range, where Bowie's a little bit lower. He's kind of moved over, and he has almost that similar sound to him in here. So anyways, that's just on this particular track, and I happen to kind of like it, so I made a note of it. The next track is kind of a bit of a drop here. Nice piano opening, vocals up close, and I feel like they're not as filtered, at least not on the bright side. A little bit more maybe on the dark side, which is kind of unusual because I think the dark side tends to be a little bit more natural sounding, where the vocals on the bright side tend to sound like they're a little bit more filtered, although they were a little bit clearer in this song. He has a very operatic vocal and instrumental part to this particular song as well. This was at this point the lowest number on of the rankings so far. I'd give this one a 6.5. So it's the lowest so far. That's pretty good, you know. The next one goes up a little bit, Olive Tree. This one I actually thought I would like a lot more. It's very upbeat opening. The vocals are strong, traditional Gabriel sound that you get on a lot of his tracks. Catchy, upbeat percussion, drum, bass rhythm, which is more predominant on the dark side mix. And the dominant keyboards, which are more predominant on the bright side mix. At least that's the way I see it. And I gave this song a 7, so I think it's actually the last. Yeah, it's the last 7. The rest of them are 6s and 6.5s. I found the album just kind of slowly winds down to a certain point, but it doesn't actually drop off. See, it kind of winds down slowly. So the next song, Love Can Heal, it's kind of a sad, it's a bit of a sad opening, but it has that violin in it too that kind of adds to that feeling. And the vocals are subdued. I just found it a sad song. I didn't care for it as much. It's probably one of my least favorite songs on the album. The next track up, This Is Home. It's got a catchy rhythm section, kind of a nice beat to it. It's got almost a folky flavor to the song. As folky as Gabriel tends to get, he's not what I would call, he's not like Paul Simon, which is kind of, they're similar music, but Paul Simon tends to be a lot more on the folky side, where Big Gabriel seems to be a little bit more in the middle. And then you got David Bowie, who's a little bit more experimental in going into the heavier versions and more Americanized music than either of these two. So it's kind of a percussion dominated song as well. I think the Dark Side version I don't think it's as good. It's heavier, or it seems thicker, I guess is a word that you might want to describe it as, but I don't think it's necessarily a better version of the song. The last 2 tracks I had to flip over for another page yet. Okay, so you got And Still, which is the next song. This is the song that kind of competed for that bottom rung of songs I like the least. I still gave it a 6 though, so that's quite above the average. And it has an opening, which is kind of a keyboard synthesizer sound. A little bit more, another of those subdued vocal range songs where he's almost down in his vocals. And this song is brought down by, bring his vocals down a little bit more because it's piano dominated. There's a lot of piano on this track. And the last track, which is Live and Let Live, it's got more of an upbeat tempo than the predecessors, 2 or 3 predecessors there. The vocals are a little bit more on the husky side than the smooth side in Gabriel's repertoire. The violins are both catchy on this, and it's got a bit of a catchy upbeat. Not a bad track to end it. I think it came up just a notch. So the album tends to, if you're doing a flow chart, you'd have high here and just gradually retreating down until you get to here where it kind of moves up and down a little bit to end the album. And I find it overall it's a solid album. And then it has its 2 versions. So you got the bright side version, which I've talked a little bit about. I find this a little more synthesizer and keyboard oriented side. It has a little bit of horns in there on some of the tracks, some violins, of course, recorder, I think, on one particular track as well. There are, just little instruments that are that play a little bit more on that, or easy. I guess they're easier to hear because they tend to be not dominating instruments. So this side is clear of that heavy feeling, not as heavy of a feeling, and so those things come out more. And I don't want to suggest that it's a lamer, more quiet, more subdued version. I don't think that's it at all. I think it's the same as the dark side, just it's not as thick, I guess, as maybe a term maybe you could use to describe it here. It has a lot of augmented sounds to it as well, and you can hear those sounds because you're not. And I think what the difference between the two versions is the bright side. You hear those little bit more augmented things, like I've already said, the violin, ukulele, mandolin, keyboards, of course, which is the dominant instrument on this side, horns, recorder, violins, all that kind of stuff. You'll hear more of those because you don't have a dominating drum guitar part, which is more prevalent on the dark side, and maybe that's why people think that I'm trying to say it's heavier, because it's the drums and the guitar parts are more prevalent on the dark side. Doesn't necessarily mean it's heavier. I think they're a little thicker and they tend to cover up more, so you wouldn't hear as much of the augmented sounds as you would hear on the bright side. And that's just from observations. I could be completely wrong here, but I don't think so. I think that is the case, and I think he created that on purpose because some people don't like that real heavy sound that drums and guitar tend to bring out in music. Whereas with the bright side, it's not as prevalent. You can hear all that little instrumentation. The song, both sides I find are pretty much the same, other than one side's a little more dominated by guitar and drums, where the other side's a little more dominated by keyboards and synthesizers. Overall, I like both sides of it fairly extensively. I like them both, but I just prefer. I guess what I might want to say is that some of the more intricate stuff that you want to hear from the quieter songs, or the more vocally subdued songs, if you want, I like the bright side better because you can hear all the instrumentation, which is really what you want to hear. Whereas the heavier songs, the songs that are more upbeat, more heavy tempoed, less subdued, there's more guitar. The dark side offers that more guitar drum, which adds to that, which is the part that I like better with those heavier songs. So I don't know if any of this has made any sense to anybody, but it's just an observation. This has been one of the most complex what's new videos to do. It's also probably the longest one. Anyways, overall, I give the album, if you're doing the 5 scale, I would give it a 4.25 out of 5. I tend to like heavier songs, so if there'd been a few more heavier songs, it probably would have went higher. But overall, I think Gabriel's voice is spot on. This is one of his better vocal performances. I really love his voice, and it comes crystal clear. The bright side, I think it's more crystal clear in a lot of cases, and then the dark side, it's more clear when he's doing the heavier parts. Yeah, overall, he's just fantastic. Now, as to the binomial side, I didn't really listen too much to that. My understanding with the binomial side is that it tends to be somewhere, it kind of blends the two, I guess. I could be wrong here, but it sounds like it's blending, so you get a kind of a medium mix, so you're getting a little bit of everything. So you don't get maybe as much intricacy as you get in the right, but you don't get as much of the guitar and stuff as you get in the left. So you kind of get a medium. That's my understanding of it. Anyways, it was an interesting listen. I like the album. Definitely an album I want to have. I think going forward will do well. I'm wondering how it's going to participate in my end of the year top 10 favorite songs, favorite albums of 2023. I don't know how it's going to fit in there because it's kind of late in the year, but we'll see. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode of What's New. If you have anything you want to add to it, or maybe I'm misunderstanding something that you might want to explain a little better, or you think that you understand it a little better, you can put that in the comment section down below. And please hit the like and subscription button. That is much appreciated. If you want to be notified of content on this channel, then please hit the notification bell, and I'm sure that you will get notified when these videos are coming out. So please have yourself a good day, and we will see you going forth next week on Thursday night for What's New. Take care and good day. Bye.